Okay, so we're going to talk about tools, and the introduction to tools here is the way these things work is every cutting edge has what's called a bevel on it. So you can see this is called the bevel, and that is where it comes from a piece of steel down to a cutting edge. Generally speaking, we're working with softer woods, and every bevel is dead flat from back to the front. A way to check this is using a straight edge and putting it on the bevel and holding it up to good light, or you can see it there. If this bevel is hollow ground, that's fine. Then you just have contact at the back and at the front. If this bevel is whatever the opposite of that is, if it's curved like that and your straight edge is rocking around it, it might feel sharp, but it's not going to cut. I think that's the real essential thing about having a sharp tool, is having a dead flat bevel. Doesn't matter the style of knife. Now some carvers and some woodworkers, especially if they're working with harder woods like oak and things like that, which is another carving species that people do work with, even on Vancouver Island. We've got the Gary oaks. I don't have a lot of experience with that myself. They will put what's called a micro bevel at the edge of their tool, which means that it's got this flat bevel and then another little bevel at an angle like that. And it allows you to have a less steep bevel. Like, the longer and thinner this is, the more delicate it is. So, if I was to take some of these soft, long steep bevels made for softer woods and try to pound it through an oak knot or something, I could definitely fold the edge or crack it. So that allows them to have a steeper bevel, which is thicker steel, and then sharper just at the edge. Some people, generally speaking, the top of the bevel, or the top of the tool on the opposite side of the bevel, is got to be dead flat. This is also equally important, is that bevel being flat this way, that the top being dead flat. Now, my friend Kirsten learned in Norway, and his teacher would take a small bevel off this edge here because it, to him it exits the wood easier. I would warn you against that without a lot of experience. That is really easy to screw up your tool. So conversely, this tool has a bevel and a dead flat bottom, or convex. So what we're looking at here is two styles of tools in essence. This being the European style of tools, and they're called gouges. And the difference between a gouge and a chisel: a chisel is flat and a gouge is curved. Same kind of idea, same sort of tools. A lot of chisels are meant to be hit with hammers. Any of these gouges, a lot of them are meant to be hit, but they're meant to be hit with mallet. So a mallet can be wood, it can be hard rubber. They make some little brass ones. It's just you don't want to use a normal hammer because you will destroy the wooden handles. Now, in explaining and understanding gouges, it's a pretty simple system. I do believe it's pretty standard, and it works like this. So each one of these, this Swiss made is made by P-File, is the parent company. This is a little bit of the gold standard in gouges right now. unless you can find real old steel. These are consistently really well made, really good steel, and they hold their edges and their value for potentially generations. So there's some numbers on every one of these, and on some of the other ones, these are German made, the numbers stamped here. And those numbers relate to, first, 2 meaning the curve. So flat being a 1, 2 being barely curved, 3 the curve increases, 5 the curve increases some more, and I have an 8 here. The curve increases more. I believe it goes up to 11, which is a super steep curve. The second number on these guys is millimeters width. So an 818 is a 8 curve, and it's 18 millimeters wide. So it's a pretty simple system for knowing what you're getting. There's one other style, that's these. They're called fishtail gouges. You see the difference in the shape, where it's a long skinny thing that tapers out at the end, where this tapers straight, much more gradual. The edge here is really quite square, where the edge here is flared out. So these are identified by an F in the number. So this is a 5 curve, fishtail, F, 14 millimeter. Advantage being of these guys is getting into corners, getting into little tight spaces. These are fantastic little finish tools. I just have a couple, this little one and that mid-size one.
Sorry, can you show me that one again? Just hold them up to you.
Yeah. So they're both 5s, but one's a 6 millimeter and one's a 14. Okay. Little treasures, these fishtails. You'll notice how I'm picking them up and putting them down, and how they're laid. You know, I'd call this tool etiquette. Something I learned from other carvers. Because this is all made of high carbon steel, they're very hard, and they're therefore very brittle. So if these two guys go clink together, the chances of one of them chipping is great, and that could be the end of your tool, and you know, make somebody like me really cry. So we alternate the metal parts, so if an accident happens, like earlier that happened, nothing catastrophic. There's lots of different ways. Like, I would never carve like this. I would only have the few tools here that I'm really using for whatever I'm carving. This is for the purpose of demo today, so they're like all spread out here, but this is kind of crazy. But whenever I do that, I make sure they're put down similar to this, or if there's just a few, they're spread out enough that the edges don't bang together. This set right here, these little guys, came from my dad's dad, and these are old English carving tools, old English steel. It just says 6 England. The stamp on these is kind of illegible now. These are total treasures. This old steel has generally got higher carbon in it and some qualities that modern steel just really doesn't have. If you ever see this kind of thing at an auction or secondhand shop, buy it. something to watch out for, though, when you're buying used tools is the rusting. So what will happen with rust is it will pit the steel. This is an extreme example of a very rusty piece of steel, and you see the pitting in it. That, you know, if that piece of steel wasn't so thick, I would never be able to get that nice shiny edge. I have another. Yeah, this was a friend's. You know, if this could be saved. The pitting is from rusting. I've sanded off all the rust, but that cutting edge is forever not going to be good because it's full of pits, and it's like this where it should be flat and perfect. So buyer beware. Buying used tools is a great way to get tools. Please make sure they're not too rusty. A little bit of surface rust might be fine, but if it's been there for years, that steel is oxidizing, it's pitting, and you'll never get a good edge out of it, even though it used to be a, you know, beautiful working thing. Like, I don't think it would matter how far I ground this thing back, I would still be into pitting in the steel. Shame, shame. Okay, so we've got these European tools, and as you see, they start, you know, big, and then they get really little. There's some little tiny detail chisels. Generally, I'm not working with anything much smaller than that. These have curves, and some of them are pretty flat. All of these guys here are called straight knives, and you can see the variety. This is a Kestrel blade with the handle I put on it. It's a long, slow curve. It's got some flex to it. It's got this beautiful sharp point. It's really great for reaching in to get at places with detail. You can even use it to like flatten areas as well as for cutting. And myself, I often like to be able to use two hands, so I put larger handles on there than some. This is a big heavy duty one. This is a, can't remember where the blade came from, but my partner Mary carved me this beautiful handle out of cherry for it, and that's a definite two-hand cutting tool on bigger work. This one's the first tool I ever made, and I still use it. I love this knife. I made it on my propane stove when I was living in a bus out of an old file, and somehow I got it right. Just luck, really. That's a split piece of yew wood. It's got this funky shape to it, but boy, it works, and I've used it for 30 years now. So this is another tool I made. You know, if you get into tool making and you're into a project and you're like, how am I going to reach in there, or whatever it is. So I just made this out of a chainsaw file, and it's got a crazy curve, and it's for scooping down and in. These are part of a line of tools called Flex Cut. They're flexible, bouncy steel. It's called like a palm tool. It's a one-handed tool. They're quite common in the market. Great for detail work. Not so great for bigger work, obviously. Okay, so that leads us to this other batch of tools here, and these I would just call West Coast tools. And the distinct knife here is called the hook knife or crook knife. Generally speaking, there are two bevels. Sometimes they're just one bevel for used in one direction, but most commonly there's two bevels and a dead flat back or a little bit hollow ground. This is a Kestrel blade that I put my own handle on because I wanted two hands. There's a one of the nicest knives I have. And as you can see, there's an infinite variety from flat or really slow curve to, you know, much more of a radical curve, and everything in between. As far as I know, there is no standard for identifying the curves. I kind of had this conversation with Charlie recently. He has his system. Charlie's from Kestrel Tools. He has his system. I think Moy has his system with Claquett Tools, and I imagine every tool maker makes their own. So generally speaking, the wider blades, like this one I made, and this one came from Eric Glendale in Port Alberni, another knife maker. When they're really wide, they're good for using on, you know, for flattening larger surfaces. And when they're skinny like that, it's a little bit better for detail work. What happened? Now, these ones here are something I was really excited about getting into, and this my last batch of knives. I made these because I wanted them. It's called a reverse bevel knife. These two are good comparisons. So these both have similar curves, but this one, the bevel is on the back side. There's great advantages to these if you are sculpting and tight curved areas in here, places like that. This only has that little bevel to rest on before it has to come around and cut, whereas this has that, you know, just doesn't turn the corner the same. It's kind of standing up and not cutting. You know, I should say, you know, I'll do this in the demos, but the essence of being able to cut a piece of wood is the angle of the bevel to the wood. You know, simply speaking, I'm not going to carve this like that. I've got to bring that bevel down and carve, you know, so I'm just taking off a little bit. So that's the, you know, the principle with the hook knives as well, is you just want to take a little tiny bit off. I'll get into that in the demos. So these are you know, a few different reverse bevel knives that I made, having different applications in carving. Still, you know, learning a lot about them and their uses. And this is a little BB made from, you know, I got from Lee Valley. It's also a reverse bevel, small one, but they have their place. I'll get into this batch of tools over here. These are the adzes, and the adze is ADZE. So these ones are all elbow adzes, and these couple, 3 here, are D adzes. So the handle's a little bit like a D. The D adzes seems to be colloquial. Carvers really like these D adzes. I know the Martin brothers like their D adzes. You get a lot of control with these because your hand is really close to that edge, and you know, the motion of using these is like this. They do impact your hand quite a bit more. So I'm, you know, my handles are never finished because I'm always tweaking them in my learning. I'm trying to make a little seat here for my palm when I use that. And you know, Joe Martin would say, you know, he you know, they're carving their handles to remind them of their teaching. So I really would like to see that through, you know, to finish carving my handles. Anyways, this is a genuine hippie tool made by Godfrey Stevens, wildman, carver, artist, painter, philosopher of sorts. And he made this by hand on Long Beach in the 60s. using a hacksaw to cut an axe in half. And he lashed it to this handle that he made and chucked some bolts through so it wouldn't fall apart. And for some reason he gave it to me. It was rusty, and I don't know, I just cleaned it up, and I've never really found the place for it to use it, but taking care of it for now. But it's a genuine artifact of recent history, West Coast history. So this is also made from a axe. You can see the profile, and I didn't know enough or any better than to cut, you know, I've seen other tool makers would cut that part off and just use the steel. But I always saw that as that could have a really great advantage of being a very strong joint, and I don't have to lash this. I can just chuck a couple screws in there, and all the banging is got a mechanical stop to it there, as opposed to this more traditional style. So this one's the other half of that. Was a double-headed axe, and I recently refitted this one on this handle with this ridiculous steep bevel for my friend Chris in Port Alberni to do some texture work on the beams in his new shop. So these elbow adzes are really fantastic tools, favored by a lot of carvers because there's a lot less impact. So we basically have a couple kinds, you know, this being a gutter adze, so it's got a curve to it. This is a Kestrel blade, and it's their baby gutter. I made the handle. This is another axe head one that I made that's a much bigger version of a gutter adze. And also from those guys, Charlie and Greg, I learned about the geometry for making a good adze. I always thought it was something in this angle was what made a good adze, but their technique, or wherever they learned it from, is really simple. It's 90 degrees from the bevel angle there and to that spot on the handle, and that's the top of your grip. So when you're laying it out on a rough piece of wood, you can put your steel there and then measure across and kind of get a feel for, oh yeah, where I need to make that cut to set the blade. So you notice pretty well all these are the same. They have that really similar angle. So it's steep but not too steep. And this is a different kind. This is called a lip adze. It's flat here and folded on the edges. The folding of the edges helps it not to dig in, but it does smooth over and flatten out, you know, maybe from gouges from maybe a gutter adze or whatever. So I have 3 different sizes of them. That blade was given to me. This one I made out of a chainsaw blade, and this one was leaf spring steel, much bigger. So this is more totem pole size tools, especially these last 3. This one I made flat for flattening out work, or a lot of times in bigger work you will make kerfs in the material with a chainsaw, a bunch of cuts, and then you can chop that stuff out with something like that. Again, old leaf spring. Again, you're looking for older steel when you're using reclaimed steel. It's generally speaking better quality meaning higher carbon content in the steel. This is a masterwork of tool making by late Henry Nola. I'm borrowing it and taking really good care of it. We use this for texture adzing. If you've ever been to the Wicken Inn, all those timbers that are carved, or Roy Henry Vickers Gallery, that style of texturing across the grain was done with a tool similar to this. So that's how I modeled this handle to be similar angle. This guy has the bonus of being springy, so you don't want these tools to be penetrating, you want them to be bouncing out. Okay, and then these tools on the outside there, this is called a slick. It's basically a gouge on steroids, a chisel on steroids. It's flat, used for timber work and for flattening areas on totem poles or whatever. And this piece of steel, you know, I was told it was turn of the century. I got it from a trader fellow years ago. It was rusty, but boy, it came out nice, and I made that handle for it. It's not really meant to be used with a mallet. It's you use your body and the weight of the blade to cut. So I made this one because I wanted a slick. I call that my little mini slick. That's made from a chainsaw bar. No, it's not. It's made from something else. Anyways, that same thing. I'm not really using a gouge, or sorry, a mallet so much. I'm just pushing it through the wood. Mark, could you pass me that piece?
This one?
Yeah. So I'll just show you, like, instead of making it straight across, it's skewed that. It's called a skew, and I crowned it a little bit, which really helps it cut through the wood. Anyways, by skewing it and giving it a little bit of shape, it means I'm not trying to push that whole edge through the wood at once. It's paring off a little bit at a time. And then this one last one here is a double bevel blade, and this one is really for use with a mallet and chopping into, you know, pull big reveal out of bigger wood. It can be used to pare wood as well, but it's a little hard on the hand with the brass ferrule. The ferrule's here to protect the wood from splintering from all the smashing. Yeah. And finally, this is a pair of reverse bevel, single-sided, single bevel. So one goes this way, one goes the other way. And these are bigger knives for bigger cleanup of larger areas and larger carving. Really not much of a curve, but a pretty steep bevel, so it's nice and sharp. Okay. And I will mention, if you're interested in getting started in carving, this is Lee Valley some years ago gave us a $500 gift certificate to the festival, and so I ordered this set of tools. So this set right here, 7 gouges. This is a really good kind of mid-grade gouge. It's like mid-size as well. It's not quite as big as the full size. A little bit more of a mid-size gouge. This made by Hirsch from Germany. So this set is for the festival. I use it for workshops. I just administer this set, and I loan it out to people who are learning to carve. And there's quite a variety here of different gouges and bevels. So I supplemented it with this bigger gouge for rough work for people, and then a straight cutting knife, and then 3 hook knives. So Lee Valley does sell, they call them Haida carver knives. There's 1, 2, and 3, and I put handles on them. These knives don't come sharp. You have to really work at them to get them sharp. But and they're also pretty thin. Advantages and disadvantages with that: the thinner blades, it's easier to pull through the wood. It's been, you know, pointed out to me. My friend Francine, she finds these too thick. I don't know if you can see the difference.
Just keep holding it there. Okay.
In the thickness of the steel on those guys. So, you know, perhaps for women or more finesse carvers, thinner blade is easier to pull through the wood, but the disadvantage comes when you really yard on them, and they're flexible and they can bend or break. So to each their own. In regards to like your personal preferences of how you like your steel. Anyways, this was, you know, several years ago. I don't know if you get this for $500 anymore, and it does seem like a significant investment, but that's a complete set. You can do a lot with this. You can do a lot. There's another supplier, it's called chippingaway.com, and they sell sets of Swiss-made mid-sized tools, very comparable to this. And they're called the Mary May carving sets. There's 2 or 3 different ways, and that is a way of, it's a little bit cheaper than buying them individually, and a great way to start. I put up on the board there tool suppliers for the European style tools, and for carving, sharpening supplies, and everything else to go with carving. You know, there's Lee Valley, this chippingaway.com. Midland Tools has some Swiss-made tools hanging on the wall. It's always nice to see what you're buying. They don't have the full selection. There's other suppliers online. And then I've written down a few of the West Coast knife makers. They're more like, you know, smaller time people making knives in batches. Kestrel Tools and Clackwood Tool Company. There's a fellow over Island, Herb Rice, who's making tools. There's Eric Glendale, he's in Port Alberni, and Wes Skookum, he's up in Port Hardy. I'm sure if you investigated, you'd find some more knife makers, but that's really the only way to get the crook knives is from a small-time maker of knives. Yeah.